Okay, folks, thank you for coming along tonight. My name's Chris Deeran, I'm the director of Enlighten, Scotland's independent, non-partisan think tank. This is the latest in our Meet the Leaders series. As ever, we're grateful to Judy and her team at Standard Life and to Malcolm and the crew at Charlotte Street Partners for the support and partnership and these events. So far, we've had John Swinney, Anis Sarwar, Russell Findlay and Alex Cole-Hamilton. This evening it's the turn of the new kid on the block, Malcolm Offord of Reform UK Scotland. This feels a bit spicier than the others, Malcolm. I'm not entirely sure why.
It's just the white wine?
It might be the white wine, or maybe the curry I had earlier. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. I am somewhat disappointed. I don't know how many of you were at the John Swinney event, but I did start asking about the fact that he only ever wears purple ties, and how many of them he has. And also they don't suit skin, so it's just a weird thing. But I did want to ask Malcolm about the extremely weird aquamarine tie that people who are representing Reform tend to wear, and he turned up in a blue tie, which is infuriating. But I have never seen an aquamarine tie in any shop, Malcolm. I've never seen the colour in nature other than the sea outside of maybe the Caribbean, which I can't afford to go to. Some of us can, some of us can't. Where did you find those ties? Did
Well,
you
they've all been bought in a job lot, that's the point. If you join Reform, you get a free tie. Come on.
As well as the Farage football top.
I'll not put that on, I'll tell you that now. No, you get a free tie.
Right.
It's not all
You just got the one.
Well, yeah,
You can surely afford a few.
yeah, got a couple.
Got a couple.
Well, they get little scarves. You know, it's a free, Sarah put you with a little scarf. Yeah.
So are you still officially Lord of Garvel? Is that still Lord Offord of Garvel? Gravel, Lord Offord of Gravel.
Garvel.
So you had that massive thing that you signed, which didn't look very official.
So technically, I resigned from the House of Lords. Okay, I resigned from the House of Lords, and that's for life. You resign, you can't get back in. That's it. You're out. You go. And then I assumed, because I'd done it before, and not many people, in fact, very few people resigned from the House of Lords. I just assumed at that point you hand back your title. It's like, I'm done with that. I have a red box. Where do I send it to? Send it to Buckingham Palace. But I was told that was very presumptuous and rude, and you don't do that. If you're given that, it's a life sentence. You're given that for life. So I have it. I don't use it, but technically, apparently, it's my letters patent don't get cancelled.
So you will be Lord Offord for life.
Well, if that alleged that is the legal reality, but no, I don't need to use it.
And you said that you will be Malcolm from Greenock. That's going to be the thing.
Well, I am actually Malcolm from Greenock, so
you are indeed. And I suppose there's a question that many people in the audience tonight, not everyone, but many people will want to ask, and I'm going to ask it, which is, Malky for Greenock, what are you up to? What on earth are you up to?
Sound like my mother. Is that a real question?
Yes.
She was still there?
Yeah.
What am I up to? I'm ambitious for Scotland. I'm fed up with mid-table mediocrity. I think Scotland's massively underperforming. I'm a bit embarrassed by that. So I want to do something about it. And the party I was in didn't have the ambition or the vision to do anything about that. And I banged on about that for about a year. I even wrote some stuff to help them along the way. But by their own admission, they said to me, we only have one policy, we only want one policy.
Which was?
Which is to say no to a referendum. That's the only way we get votes, is what I was told by the Scottish Conservative Party. So they're in a codependent relationship with the SNP. They're in a doom loop. So these two parties just want to talk about one thing. The SNP want to talk about the referendum, so we don't have to talk about the track record. And the Conservative Party want to say no to a referendum. And frankly, everyone's fed up with that. Let's talk about how to make the country successful, prosperous, happy, wealthy. What do you mean, Malcolm? No, we don't want to talk about that. That's far too complicated. So,
who would say to you what you mean, Malcolm?
The leadership of the Scottish Conservative Party. I was the treasurer, and I was organising donor dinners, and the donors were saying, well, what's the plan for government? Well, they don't have one.
I mean, that's a bit ambitious, isn't it, for the Scottish Conservatives?
Well, I know, but if you're in it, you've got to be in it to win it, right? Otherwise, what do you think? Right? Have you got a plan for government? No, don't have a plan for government. So, I, for whatever reason, think I've got a plan for government. So that's why I had to join a new party. And the second reason, so that was the first reason for leaving. The second reason was actually being in London, being the Lords, and I was given the brief by Kenny to look at the energy brief. I said, why are you giving this to me? I've done business, I've done quite a lot of business. Steve Halliday's here with Mac, etc. I know the energy space, but I haven't done energy politically. She said, you look at it differently because you're a business guy and you don't have any baggage on the legacy issues. You give me an honest view. And it's like peeling the onion. You peel the onion back and you begin to look at what's actually happened to our energy system. And it's just absolutely appalling what we've done. You know, our energy is now 7 times more expensive than China, 4 times more expensive than the US. We're completely deindustrializing, getting really good high quality jobs. We're covered in, the whole country's covered in wind turbines with not a single blade made in Scotland. So anyway, so I began to say this at the dispatch box in the House of Lords as the opposition spokesman. I got the most opposition from my own side. I would come out there with darts in my back from people like Theresa May, because she was the Prime Minister, put that silly act through in 90 minutes in the House of Commons without a vote. Net zero, the illegal target 2050. Alex Sharma, COP26. John Selwyn Gilman, Lord Demon.
But you think something with COP26?
And I just thought.
Sorry, but COP26, where you have world governments coming together, trying to address the issue of climate change. Now, that's not to say that net zero doesn't have challenges, but you don't think that was worthwhile doing?
I don't think it was worth putting a law through our legislature where our energy system is 75% hydrocarbon and 25% non-hydrocarbon, comprising 10% nuclear, 10% wind farms, and 5% biomass, and saying on an arbitrary basis that in 25 years we're going to flip that on its head and make it 25% hydrocarbon and 75% non-hydrocarbon, without a plan of how to do that. I went to COP26. It was one of the first things I did when I became a minister in the Scotland office. And, I was full of enthusiasm for it, coming in without any particular knowledge of my sector. Very enthusiastic about the whole concept. Britain actually did an incredible job in this respect, which is that when Britain took on the presidency of COP26, there were 30% of global emissions signed up to the concept of net zero. And Britain managed to get that to 90%. Because India came in for a 2070 target. They actually did, if that is the objective, to get everyone signed up to the idea of a cleaner energy system and lower emissions, Britain did quite a good job. And the idea that we are 0.81%, less than 1% of global emissions, and that we impoverish ourselves and deindustrialise our economy to set an example for the rest of the world, where China, which accounts for 30% of emissions, is 70% coal, burning coal. That's why they're 7 times cheaper. They're using that as their transition fuel. So they burn coal. So we stopped burning coal in '97, and in that year the world burned 4 billion tonnes of coal. And today the world burns 8 billion tonnes of coal. So weren't we good Boy Scouts?
So should we just jump back in and forget about the environment, forget about climate change, and because of the limited impact that the size of our economy or the size of the impact we can have on climate change, we just get rid of all of that regardless of whether we think it's the right or wrong thing to do?
No, because our kids won't let us do that. So what we need to do is to get a balanced scorecard of the cleanest energy system we can have, but with a hierarchy of needs. The number one needs to be secure. I think we'd all agree with that in the past week. Secondly, affordable. And then I would say, you can't say no emissions, because we will always need hydrocarbons, but let's say you can get to negligible emissions. If you take that SANE, that says sane. Let's have a sane energy policy. But let's do it don't set an arbitrary target for this. Let's do it in a way that technology allows it to develop. Let's do it in a way that the market allows it to develop. Instead, what we've done is create a Ponzi scheme, a man-made Ponzi scheme, using taxpayers' money to fund a renewable program which is not merchant viable. We were told 30 years ago when the first wind farms were built that they would be the cheapest form of energy. Okay? They were given a 15-year subsidy. And we were told that they would be like any child who's in adolescence becomes an adult, they become merchant viable. They did 15 years of subsidies. Then they got another 15-year subsidy. That's 30 years. And last month, Ed Miliband gave them another 20 years. I've not yet been able to find anyone who can answer the question, if this is the cheapest form of energy, why does it need to be subsidised for 50 years? And in the meantime, our bills, our energy bills, are only 1/3 of your energy bill is the cost of energy. This is a tax on poor people. This is the biggest transfer of money from poor people to rich people since Robin Hood.
How does your view on this differ from the Conservative leadership, the current Conservative leadership?
I took them on a journey. I took them on a journey for a year. They are very divided on it. They have got very, very strong green element, and obviously you've got the
Do they?
They do.
So who are the people that are strong?
Well, it's led by those who put a lot of political capital into that. Obviously, Theresa May put an act of parliament.
She's in the
No,
law.
but they don't ever underestimate the power of the grandees in the Conservative Party. Right? And there's also quite a strong, it's the CEN, it's the Conservative Environmental Network. I had a lot of difficulty with that, and I can see a divided party. And the reality is a divided party cannot make decisions. And a divided party they can think something intellectually but viscerally doesn't understand it. You've got to make up your mind on this issue. And for me, that was the second reason for leaving, which is I couldn't stay in that environment. And the offering that's available, where I can see the ability to have a party in Scotland that is actually going to make Scotland prosperous, and a party that is prepared to take tough decisions and honest decisions on things like climate change. Not denying climate change in any way, but let's just say that we shouldn't be impovering ourselves and ripping up our industrial base for this. This idea of a just transition, go and talk to the folks in Aberdeen about that, or Greensmith. Nothing just about, the OEUK have come out and just said that the transfer of jobs from the hydrocarbon industry to the offshore wind farms is only running at 58%. And they're only at 2/3 of the salaries. So all our whole, and this idea of gas, why would we import 70% of our gas from Norway, from fields in the North Sea over the fence from the ones that we're shutting down? When even the Norwegian energy minister thinks that's daft. So it's just, that's an issue that we just got to confront, and reforms confront it.
Okay. I want to talk to you about the mantle of leadership. So you are a very successful business person. You've had a lot of money in business. You've got your own company. You've led companies. Political leadership is a different thing, though. And you've had moments where you've said things that maybe you think in the aftermath I probably shouldn't have said.
Did you notice that?
Well, I did notice the Catholic school thing, which was a moment where you said what you probably thought, and then realised afterwards that wasn't a very sensible thing.
Can I explain what I said?
By all means.
That was an interview talking about integration, how we integrate in this multicultural society we have. We've got more and more people coming, more and more religions coming, how do we integrate? And it was to do with the speech that Anna Sauer had made, and he talked about whether they would have Muslim schools one day. And I just said instinctively, I'm not comfortable with that because it feels a bit sectarian, right?
Which is a dangerous word to use.
I know, and that is a mistake because I grew up with that and didn't enjoy that element of West Scotland. And I said, I remember my best pal at school, my best pal on the street. I got Eddie, we played football together, and he went to a different school from me, and I just said I regretted that. That's what I said. It was a human comment. I said I regretted the fact that I went to a different school for him. That got turned into a headline saying, Reform UK leader wants to abolish Catholic schools. Didn't say that. I don't mean that. I would never think of doing that.
But you didn't think there should be religious...
But maybe it was a loose comment, maybe it was a loose comment. It was an honest comment to say, I like the idea of everyone being together, being integrated, not being segregated. And I gave an example that when I was 5 years old, I was confused. When I was 5 years old, my best pal ended up in school for me. That's all I said. But I'm learning, I'm going to learn how to do this, I'm going to learn how to do this. But I'm just being very honest with you. But then I read the next day and it says, Reform UK wants to shut down Catholic schools. Nothing's further, could be further from my intention.
But you did give that impression in your comment. They were loose comments for a professional politician, which is what you now are.
I wasn't thinking about the whole process of Catholic. I was just thinking about everybody being, how do we integrate and live together, and how do we, for our young people, have common values. That's all it was. So you might say that was a mistake.
And in an education system in Scotland where there is almost no choice in the state system, the Catholic non-denominational thing is probably one of the few pieces of choice that parents can have.
Sure. And my sister's kids went to the Catholic school system.
What did she say to you after that?
No, she doesn't have a thing that she knows I have no issue with that. So she knows that I wasn't making a. She knows I was not making a point of that.
Okay. So we've known each other for a good few years now. A reasonable number of conversations about politics.
Yeah.
And until you moved to Reform, I always thought of you as being a sort of one nation conservative, probably someone who would have fitted quite comfortably in the party of Rishi Sunak, George Osborne, and indeed Kemi Badenoch, who you worked very closely with and thought highly of.
Are they all three one nation?
Well, I would say so. How
do you define one nation?
A party that is trying to work across the different class elements and be there for each of them as you go. There are tough decisions to be taken, but you don't take those decisions in the absence of understanding that you're impacting the lowest and the highest as you go. But I would never have put you in a party with Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Lee Anderson and Nadine Dorries, and you willfully chose to step across that line to have those bedfellows as opposed to, I guess, the moderate conservatism, which is what I would always have thought of you. And I'd like you to explain that thinking.
Yeah. And perhaps it's actually being in the House of Lords and seeing all the grandees of the Blair government and the Cameron government around me, and just thinking that something's gone wrong in the last 25 years in Britain. We are not as prosperous as we should be. We're not as happy as we should be. Our public services are not run as well as we should be. And something's gone wrong. And I think being there and seeing them all together, you realise that the phrase that Nigel Farage used, uniparty, did catch on with me a little bit. So I'll give you an example. 2015 was an argument between George Osborne and Ed Balls about on finance, about how they would reduce borrowing over a certain period. And the argument between them was that Ed Balls said he would do it over 5 years, and George Osborne said he'd do it over 4 years. What is the difference? And when I look at the fact that our energy prices are now sky high, that we have the highest taxes since the war, that we have the highest borrowing since the war, and that we have basically perhaps the most divided nation since the war, something's gone wrong. So the one nation Tory might be this nice middle of the road concept, which sits very nicely alongside the Blairite Labour. There's nothing to choose between them. With the Lib Dems thrown into the middle of the coalition for 5 years, has produced this sort of blancmange of where no one's, who's it said, General Patton said, if everyone's thinking the same thing, no one's thinking. We've just had 25 years of consensual thinking, which has resulted in the position we're in. And I'm a private equity guy. That's my business. I'm a disruptor. It's what private equity guys do. We look at a business and we say, this business is complacent. This business is not managed properly. We need to change how we do things. This business keeps saying every 5 years, they keep putting the same business plan down. 5 years after 5 years, same business plan. Okay? It's not a perfect world. Reform's not a perfect party. But it's a disruptor party, and it's here to make change to Britain. And people don't like change, fine. The only way to get change is to have a vision for change and to sell that vision. And sometimes, as we all know, you have to crack some eggs to make an omelette, but it's got to be a good omelette.
If we accept that the financial crash of 2008 was, in a sense, the moment that everything changed, that's not to say that the regulation, etc., leading up to that didn't have an impact. But people like you and your banker friends and your private equity friends, your hedge fund friends, and the rest of it, have been cashing in and riding the wave, and then everything fell over, and the banks were bailed out, and ordinary people have seen very little increase in their living standards since. Surely you've got some culpability in that.
So within the private equity loan book, the default rates of the private equity all through that dislocation of that crash was 3%. So in the area that I worked in finance, was one of the strongest credit areas available. We were not involved in doing self-certification of mortgages, which is what the banks got on doing. Was Andy Hornby came in from Asda, and he was selling a product called a mortgage, and he said, well, when we sell baked beans in Asda, we don't ask people to fill in a form. Why are we making you fill in a form? We'll just give you a mortgage. And that was all deregulated by Gordon Brown. I'm very clear that in my area, we were well regulated, and here's the thing, the reason why default rates are so low is there's alignment and interest between shareholders and management teams. And we back, private equity guys, back managers, back brilliant CEOs and CFOs, and they put their own money in it, and there's alignment of interest. And if there's any parallel between business and politics, it's trying to get alignment of interest. And this is what I don't see. This is the major issue in British politics. No, we can't get alignment of interest. I hear a lot of people complain on both sides of the spectrum about what's wrong with Britain. And I think to myself, you sort of all want the same thing, but nobody seems to be able to coalesce around one way of fixing it. Okay? Now, we did coalesce around the Uniparty for the last 25 years, but that, in a way, demonstrates how, if you just allow the processes to run without any change, you end up in a place where it's the poorest people who lose out. It's the poorest. If you don't create prosperity, it's the poorest people who lose out. This country needs to get its act together. I believe England is big enough to look after itself, right? I'm not actually fussed about England, to be honest. They've got their own issues. What I am very fussed about is Scotland. And I think they're underperforming, massively underperforming. And I think this country is, the world looks to this country for innovation, for creativity, for problem solving. That is the DNA of the Scottish people. We're not solving our own problems. Okay? And also, so the devolution experiment for 25 years.
Well, let's come on to that.
Okay.
Sorry. But
So anyway, so that back to the business thing, I would say that we were in a pretty tight business. The other thing I was very proud of private equity was it was all Scots. It was invented by Scottish people.
But it is creative destruction in practice, isn't it?
Creative
That's what private
destruction.
equity does. You go in and you find companies that need to be made more efficient, and you fire people.
What's wrong with that?
And
You don't need to
no,
fire
I'm not saying they're not.
You don't need to fire people.
Posing the question.
You don't need to fire.
And you personally and the team make vast
You
profits.
don't need to fire people.
Well, what would be the point? Well, how do you find it?
No, you don't know, because you increase margin by making people more productive. Okay? And good managers make people more productive. What they do is rearrange themselves around that back to alignment of interests. And then they go for international markets. Take your Wood Mackenzie example in here, which is a massive success story in Edinburgh. Wood Mackenzie went from a valuation of 20 million to 2 billion over 20 years without firing anybody. It is possible to grow companies. Now, the thing is, there are certain deals where people come in bottom fishing on an ambulance chasing. That always happens, but that gives, and that's 10% of the industry.
You never did that?
Well, no, never. That gives the industry a bad name, no question about it. But I was always a guy who was always told I was paying too much for a company. If you pay too much for a company, it's because it's growing, right? You never pay too much for a company that's in decline. So I was paying too much for companies that were growing, and then working really hard with the chief executives to make sure we beat the plan, make it more efficient, get the margin up, increase the size of the company. And I was very proud of the fact that on my deals overall, you know, I could say I made a sort of 3x multiple. That's terrific. But with that, I could say that in the companies I was involved in, we doubled the employee base. We had 2 times the number of employees. We had 2.5 times turnover. We had 3 times the money. Yeah, I've been like ashamed of.
All right, well done on that. I'd like to talk about your defection, and particularly the human side of it, because in politics, disloyalty is one of the things that's really frowned upon. Have you heard from Alistair Jack since you left?
Yes.
And?
Alistair is.
How many 4-letter words we used in the.
Alistair and I had a good relationship because we're both not politicians. Alistair's a business guy. Alistair's a businessman, I'm a businessman. I worked with him in the Scotland office, and we were the most effective Scotland office in 25 years. We were the Scotland office that did the whole levelling agenda. We went to meet 32 local authorities. They said to me, we haven't seen anyone from London for 25 years, 20 years. That when the revolution happened, it was in Whitehall, it was devolve and forget. And we went to them with ideas, with money, with encouragement, and direct from local authority, which of course the SNP hated. And what I discovered in that was that it didn't matter what party was in charge of the local authority, it didn't matter who the leader was. One thing that they all have in common is that local people want the best for the local communities. But just to come back to Alistair, so Alistair and I had a different perspective on this, and he is not a tribal politician like I'm not a tribal politician. So we have been able to maintain our friendship because we are business people, we knew each other before we went
What
to
did he
politics.
say about your defection?
Well, he wasn't happy, but it didn't mean to say that we can't have a cordial relationship. Not the same.
Dinner?
I haven't had dinner with them. But there's other relationships which are completely, which are over. That is
Russell Finlay would probably be one of those.
You saw that in question time.
Kevin Badenham? Yeah. He's kind of your mentor in politics in a sense.
No, Alistair was my mentor. Alistair was my mentor.
So did you not feel when you were defecting that you were really letting people down? I mean, personal relationships can matter as much as ideology or political decisions. How did that feel? I know you're a hard-nosed businessman, but actually just, without telling them in advance, as you said, and then you just suddenly took that famous photograph and you're standing out the back having a fag before you were announced by Nigel Farage. It's pretty brutal.
Sure, it is. And of course, that's the world where we live in. It's the digital world. That back in the day was all more civilized. You could phone somebody up the day before writing a letter.
Why didn't you do that?
Well, because it's out. The minute it's gone on digital, it's gone. And at the end of the day, we are where we need to do this on a very tight basis. I couldn't believe that it didn't get leaked. Okay, along the way. And of course, one is very nervous about that in the process. Look, if you go for a new job, you work for whoever it is, the Glasgow Health, and you move to the Scotsman. You don't keep in touch with Glasgow Health, tell them how you're doing when you're doing your deal with the Scotsman, do you? You do your deal with the Scotsman, you join the Scotsman, then you phone the Glasgow Health and say, I've joined the new company. Right?
Did you have any sleepless nights about the defection?
No. My conscience was very clear with the Scottish Conservatives because I'd been treasurer for a year. I'd really tried hard to encourage them to think a bit wider, a bit more ambition. They know that, and I wrote some papers for them on that called Wealthy Nation, Healthy Nation. So my no, it's fine. Well, you have to pick your team, and if the team you're in and you can't live in the team, you have to move to a different team.
How much was it about ego of wanting to run your own ship? You're a businessman, had your own companies, chance to actually have your own football team, if you like. You're not a shy man. You understand yourself, your power of your achievements and the rest of it. There's a bit of ego in there, isn't there?
Well, you couldn't really do this job without a bit of an ego. You've got to believe in what you've got to. I can't sit here and put out a vision to make Scotland the most successful part of the UK and not believe in it. So I've got to have that. I do have that burning deeply inside me. I have burning ambition and a desire to make Scotland the best part of the UK. You can decide well that translates into ego. If I want to do the job and don't have the vision, then that's ego, right? But I actually happen to have the vision and the desire to do it, and I have the self-belief to do it.
Okay. You're doing incredibly well in the polls, so it looks like the SNP will be the largest party, and it's been fairly consistent in the polls for over a year now. And you and Reform and Labour are scrapping it out for second place. So let's talk about the fact that you might end up in being the official opposition at Holyrood. So I know about you, I know about Graham,
Yeah.
there's Glasgow councillor as well, Stephen. Is it Stephen?
Thomas
Thomas.
Kerr. Yeah.
Apologies. Apart from that, I couldn't name a single other person that will be standing, and we haven't really announced them yet. But we're getting kind of close to the election now. And these are people, I presume, who have not been elected before, most of them, maybe some councillors that will be in there. But you're going to have a front bench, and that's going to be a front bench of people that are incredibly inexperienced in terms of politics.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your candidates.
So we're going to field candidates on 73 seats. And of course, what's interesting about the polls come and go, but yes, we are in second place on the balance of the average. The MRP poll came in last week, which is a very detailed poll, went a stage further, and it said that on the 73 seats, we are in second place in 54. Now, all the commentary on this is that if we have a 20% market share, vote share, that will yield, let's say, 24 MSPs through the list. There's not a single commentator or journalist or pundit who's saying that Reform will win a constituency. All right? But we're in second place in 54. So that says to me, okay, that's a bit interesting. 73 candidates, 80% have not been politicians before.
So who are
So you're going to say, well, that's a good thing or a bad thing. No, they're just ordinary people. They're doctors, lawyers, civil servants, farmers,
doctors, lawyers,
engineers, entrepreneurs, business owners, a wide spread of people, all of whom have got jobs, got businesses, i.e. don't need to do this.
So why are they doing it?
Don't need to do this, probably taking a pay cut to do it.
Yeah.
Why are they doing it? Because they're fed up of professional politicians tell you the same thing every 5 years, give you the word salad, and nothing changes. Nothing gets better. And they are motivated sufficiently to stop shouting at the telly and put themselves forward into government. And the fact is, therefore, they're not going to be smoothie chops politicians, they're not going to be media savvy, they're going to be, it's going to be a challenge, but they're all smart, they're all bright, and they're very motivated, they want to see something different.
That sounds like your candidates are much higher quality in terms of intellect and achievement than any of the other parties at Holyrood.
Well, that's for you.
In the history of Holyrood.
Well, that's for you to comment on.
Lawyers,
not for me to comment on, but
the rest of it. So you're confident in that. What's the vetting process been like?
well, it's been very intensive, as you can imagine. I mean, it's quite an exercise for a new party to put that together in short order. It's quite. And then, of course, next year we've got the council election. There's another 300 to find. So that's not an easy process to do. And the party's had some experience of this in Englandshire about not necessarily having vetted properly. So there's been a lot of testing, a lot of assessment, and a lot of vetting.
How does that work? How does the assessment and the vetting work?
We do very intensive
salt course.
We do quite a lot of intensive days. We do media, a lot of media stuff. We do a lot of personal value stuff. We worked hard on that process.
But that's in terms of what they think, in terms of what they've done in their lives. And we've seen this with reforms, we saw with UKIP and other parties that social media is the curse of these.
Yes.
A lot of these people who come in, and you look back at that, and you look back at things that they've said, and you wince when you see that, because they weren't really thinking of standing perhaps for public office at that point.
Yeah.
And they said things that they shouldn't in terms of race and in terms of the woke agenda or whatever. Has that all been checked out?
Yeah, it's all been.
So you're completely confident in all 73 candidates that they are above any kind of criticism?
There might be somebody that's fallen through the net, but we've done the vetting and we're confident in the vetting process.
Okay. Let's talk about then how you would approach Parliament with your, say, 2024 MSPs, and I suppose one of the issues with Holyrood is that it was set up to be a different type of Parliament to Westminster, not the two swords lengths, a bit more collaborative, shape of the chamber, voting system, and the rest of it. But it feels a bit like the other parties will not accept reform into that. I mean, not that they'll particularly work together anyway.
Yeah.
But we can see the problems coming down, well, we're already here, but increasingly, especially fiscal problems coming down the line over the next Parliament. Do you view reform's approach at Holyrood as being collaborative or insurgent, obstructive? Can you find ways to work with, whether it's the SNP or the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the Greens or whoever? Some will be more sympathical than others. How do you're the leader, so how do you think you will approach that in terms of politics and the day-to-day management of political affairs at Holyrood?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've not been in the Parliament before myself. We've only got one of the 73 UIs, which is Graham Simpson. So we're going to have to, we're going to have to find a way. Look, at the end of the day, reform has a centre-right agenda, which wants to make the country more prosperous, cut taxes, increase productivity, make people healthier and wealthier. Anybody who wants to come and talk to us about that agenda, we can work with. But if we're the only people with that agenda, we might have to be outsiders. In which case, we have to be the voice of the wilderness and keep saying what we believe and keep saying that within the Parliament building, putting up a case for a prosperous Scotland. And we've talked about this before, that we've had 25 years of devolution, and it's been predominantly governed by centre-left parties, by what you might call social democratic principles, whether it's been Labour or Lib Dem or SNP. And we know that the mindset in the Parliament is that any time there's a problem, the only way to fix it is throw money at it. Okay, money solves every problem. And it doesn't solve every problem. We can do better than that. We can be more creative than that. People can solve problems without it always being money. And it doesn't need to be the state every time either. And so the result is that when Scotland started on the devolution journey, the state spending as a percentage of GDP was 43%. Today it's 55%. Now the UK is 44%. And if you look at the hierarchy, London and South East would be 35%, UK 44%, Scotland 55%. So the exam question is, we're spending the most per capita of any part of the UK. Are our schools better? Are our hospitals better? Are our roads better? Are we happier? Are we more prosperous? If the answer to these questions is no, it might be time to say, should we try something different? Yeah, and to try something different is to say, let's cut tax, let's incentivize people who work to be more productive, to go the extra mile. At the moment, these are the people who are described as the ones with the broadest shoulders. They're taxed up the wazoo, and they're the ones with the broadest shoulders who are now shrugging their shoulders. And they're saying, why would I bother? Every small business owner I meet, I could probably grow my business, but what's the point? Why would I take on extra staff that just cost me more money? Why would I increase the size of my premises? I just get whacked by business rates. The employer's national insurance, the minimum, everything, the planning regulations. Do you know what? I won't bother. Or the fact that in our hospitals, we know there's times when you've got theatre capacity available, but you haven't got nurses and doctors to work in there, because what we're doing here is now we have 6 bands, which is ridiculous, versus UK having 3 bands. We're dragging a whole bunch of people who used to be just considered middle earners, like nurses and teachers, into higher rate tax bands. And then what's happening there is the law of unintended consequences kicks in, where you get pulled into a higher tax band, and then you might have another benefit you get somewhere else withdrawn. And so if you're a nurse, you might say to yourself, if I work an extra 2 hours, I'm actually going to get taxed 80% by the time I pay the extra tax and take the marginal rate of tax. And so we're not being productive as a nation. We've got 5.5 million people in the country, of whom 1 million pensioners and 900,000 of under 16, meaning we've got 3.6 million people of working age, and these are divided into 3 groups. 1 million who don't work, 600,000 work in the public sector, and 2 million people that work in the private sector. And we need to incentivise, and right now the people in the private sector are getting paid about £13 an hour, the public sector is £19 an hour. So what we've got to do, if we want to grow our economy, is incentivise the 2 million people working in the private sector to be more productive.
And you've said that you would reduce the number of tax bands in Scotland from 6 to 3,
63.
and then cut rates by 1p,
1p.
and then over the course of the Parliament you cut it by a further 3p.
By another to get to minus 1p.
And that would take us below the UK level.
Yeah.
So Scotland competing with
How
the
good
UK
is that? Scotland competing against England. I mean, don't we all like to do that? I mean, isn't that a good thing? Scotland compete against England.
Well, up to a point. So it sounds great, but then Fraser Rallender said it hasn't seen the full details of the costings. It said the impact on public services would be pretty substantial.
Did they?
No detail has been made available regarding the cuts that would be necessary as a result of this policy to comply with borrowing limits or which areas they might fall. This is a significant sum of money, and given the constraints on the Scottish Government's day-to-day budget would mean cuts to spending of a similar magnitude. We hope the detailed proposals for these cuts will be made available before the election. I suppose one of the things to say about reform, and this is at a UK level, is that it suits the party to be slightly ambiguous about stuff that there isn't often a great deal of detail, because you're juggling a couple of things. You're juggling the insurgency, and you're also juggling the fact you want to be the next government. And you're taking in all these ex-Conservatives and trying to be the party of...
Only 40% of our 73 candidates have ever been members of the Conservative Party.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah, but it's not like the English are.
Well, it's still quite a lot. But I suppose, at what point do we get the deed? So you've got your manifesto coming out next Thursday. And your candidate list coming out next Thursday.
Yeah.
And what can you tell us about that manifesto and the level of detail and the costings, and how credible the Fraser Valley Institute, the IFS, etc. will find it?
Well, I can tell you now. I don't need to wait till next Thursday.
Tell us all.
So, to align the 6 bands back to 3 UK bands is going to cost 1.2 billion.
But you've told that, we know that. You've told us
Well,
that.
hang on. And then every 1p cut costs 800 million. Okay. So the upfront 1p cut plus the alignment is 2 billion. Okay, so we've got to find 2 billion immediately for that. Okay, that is 3% of the Hollywood budget of 73 billion. Okay, there's a number of business people in the room tonight, and if I was to say to you, if you go home this evening, go to your office tomorrow, and you need to find 3%, cut 3% of your costs, please put your hand up if you can't cut 3% of your cost base.
And they come back with details of how they were going to do it. So give us
Well, let's just find out, does anyone think that's a problem? So 3% is not a problem. So then we say, well, where do we find that from? And what we're saying is, we want to avoid cutting frontline services, right? So there's all things we can go for. And the principal areas of I think, we talk about waste, duplication and ideological spend.
Every party talks about waste and duplication when they're trying to...
So we know we can find $1 billion on ideological schemes, schemes. It means things like covering the whole country in cycle lanes. Lovely idea, we can get to that at some point.
That's done.
But right now it's not a priority.
It's done.
Okay? And then we've got 133 quangos costing 6.5 billion. Right? Now, we've got 29,000 civil servants. By the way, it was 21,000 before COVID, 5 years ago. It's gone to 29,000. So again, the question is, are we better managed than we were with 29 versus 21? And we've got 23,000 working in the quangos with massive overlap between them. Okay? It's not just the waste in the quangos. The thing that I object to with the quangos, it's a democratic deficit where ministers are hiding behind quangos. What's the point of electing MSPs to become ministers if they then say in the chamber that it's nothing to do with me because it's an arm's length body? Now, I saw this at first hand when I was in the Department of Business and Trade, and I was given the task of trying to put the legislation through on compensating the post office scandal where all those poor people were falsely accused and falsely convicted of fraud. And what happened there was the post office was set up as an arm's length body, and it had a board, a chief executive, non-executive directors, a chairman, an audit committee, an investment committee. It looked just like a PLC, except there wasn't any oversight from the shareholder, who was actually the government, the minister. The minister was Ed Davey. He said he didn't. So Ed Davey at the time in 1999, up to 1999, the post office, there's 12,000 postmasters and mistresses in the UK. At that time, the prosecutions were running between 5 and 10 per annum, which is incredible. Isn't that must be the most honest group of people you could ever find. They're handling money every day, and at 12,000, there's only between 5 and 10 people being prosecuted. There's only 5 and 10 people stealing money. Then the computer came along, and it suddenly the prosecution rate went to 80 to 100 a year. Okay? Now, what the post office said was, well, we always knew they were stealing from us, just couldn't prove it. Now we've got a computer, we can prove it. Fine. That's groupthink in the PLC, but the job of the minister is to say, that doesn't smell right. Something not right there. What's happened to our lovely postmistresses and masters that have gone from 6 to 100? Intervene. No intervention. This thing on these arm's length bodies, you would actually say to the minister, no, you can't get involved. I mean, he didn't ask the question, but even if he'd asked the question, it'd be no, we're handling it. So my point is, you've got this democratic deficit, these clangos who are running $6.5 billion of public money, and it matters, it really matters to people's lives, and there's no accountability. And the worst, I know example, I'll give you another example last week, it was 2 weeks in the chamber, where that awful incident happened in Elgin, where that lad killed the bus driver, and he was given a lenient sentence. And the First Minister stood up and went on questioning why has he got a lenient sentence. Said, well, because it's decided by the Scottish Sentencing Council. I don't think the public want to hear. I think the public want to understand where's accountability and things like that. If elected politicians to run the country, why have we got these bodies sitting in between the public and elected politicians?
But accountability is a different thing from cutting quangos, and what you haven't told us, I guess, is, it's 2 months till the election, so it's about to be honest, and you will potentially be the official opposition. Which quangos are you going to cut?
I'm not going to, there's 132 of them, we've got a spreadsheet. I've got a spreadsheet, there's 132 of them, and there's a further 40 odd public arm's length bodies that need to be looked at.
Will you tell us before the election?
You can run through. We can run through any number of them. I mean, you might even start. Well, you might start by saying all of them.
You want to get rid of all of
them, and then work backwards to which ones you actually want to keep.
How many?
That actually add value to the public.
If you were judging how many of the 132 do you think it was?
Well, we've identified, let's say, probably about 25% of them. Anna Salver's come out and said a third of them. And then this commissioner chap,
Anna Salver would cut more quangos than you.
Apparently, but I mean that's what he's come out with, a third. We've got our numbers, which would be about a quarter. But my feeling is more that look. The point is that this is not a democratic way to run the country. There's a huge amount of overlap, huge amount of duplication. This chap, the Information Commissioner Hamilton, that came out last week, and he said he's now doing a review of the quangos. And his words where he can't believe how many they are, doesn't know what they all do, and he doesn't know why there's been
this. But he's not standing for election, and you are.
Yes.
And the point is.
But my point is that we're not the only people saying that.
It's not about counting. No.
We're not the only people saying that.
But you are one of the people saying
yeah.
It's a reasonable question to say 2 months from an election.
Yeah.
What are you proposing? You're asking people to vote for you. Give us detail about what it is you want to do.
We're trying to find 2 billion. We think
which quangos will
hang on. We need to find 2 billion. And we've got $1 billion of ideology we'll spend and $6.5 billion in quangos. That's $7.5 billion. You're asking me if we can find $2 billion and $7.5 billion. The answer is yes. Okay? And as I said before, my instinct would actually be to say they're all abolished until we work out which ones we really want to keep.
So I suppose I might point out that reformers did so well in the English local elections, went into local government mayoralties saying it would do much of this. It would go in and it would cut bureaucracy. And it has failed pretty much every front on that, and it's been quite humiliating for the party. Almost every party going into an election says we will save money through efficiencies and slashing waste and bureaucracy, and it never ever happens. Why should anyone believe you?
Well, it has to happen because we're at 55% spending of GDP. I mean, Scott, if you take the Holyrood budget of 73 billion and add in the Westminster piece of Scotland's funding, it's 118 billion if you look at yours. Call it 120 billion. So it costs 120 billion to run Scotland, and we raise 90 billion of revenue, which means we've got a 30 billion deficit. That's 12% of GDP. So the much vaunted idea of Scotland being independent in the EU, where the EU demanded a 3% deficit, means that your deficit's 4 times bigger, so you'd have to find 22.5 billion cuts. You want to talk about cuts? You want to talk about cuts? Try going independent. You'll have the bond market with the cuts that you'd have to put through to placate the bond market in independent Scotland. My 2 billion is a mere bagatelle, 10% of what you'd have to put through.
Okay. Let's talk about immigration. Can't talk to reform without talking about immigration. In 2021, you wrote an article for what we were then called Reform Scotland, funnily enough. We're not called that anymore. He's called that now, thanks for that. It cost us a fortune to change our name. Much appreciated. And then of course Prosper is another Scottish think tank. Chris Davies came along and stole that as well. So be careful if you're a Scottish think tank about trademarking your name, I should say. But you wrote a piece saying if we had secured a proportionate share of UK immigration in the last 30 years, our population would be 1 million higher. Our population is ageing and we need more taxpayers. Quite pro-immigration at that point. Now, I'm sure you'll say you're still pro-immigration if it's the right immigration, but you know, you headed out with the, whether the vigilantes, the high-vis vigilantes in Glasgow, and you're using language about our people, their people, which is a kind of, you know, people will have their views on immigration. I understand there are people out there who are worried about it. They're worried about asylum seekers and where they're being housed and the impact on communities. Do you think the language that you're using, well, one, have you changed your mind on that initial statement? And two, are you not worried that the language that you're using is creating division and you're doing it for purely populist political reasons? So two questions.
So on the first one, everyone keeps coming at me as if they found the one to trip me up on. Yeah. I mean, I wrote that in 2001. I said 21. Apologies. So 5 years ago, and that was before the Boris wave, before we had this huge 5 million wave of low-skilled immigration, uncontrolled low-skilled immigration. And what has gone on in the UK had been a very controlled and very beneficial immigration system, which has been wonderfully well integrated, especially in Scotland, very well integrated, where immigrants come in, did an incredible job, highly skilled, made a contribution. We don't need to talk about that. We've got wonderful communities in our country and have enriched us greatly, okay? But we were just reflecting on the fact that with an ageing population in Scotland, that if you take that over the 70 years of controlled legal migration, Scotland didn't actually get its percentage share of that. I don't quite know for whatever reason we didn't seem to get our percentage share of that. And if we got more of our percentage share of that controlled, skilled immigration, that would be good for our economy. And I was reflecting on the fact at that moment there was an issue with the Hong Kong Chinese, the British nationals, about 3 million British nationals being given Chinese citizenship. And I was saying, what a good idea to bring the Hong Kong Chinese to come and live in Scotland. Because they're highly educated, really hard-working. Hong Kong's effectively a Scottish colony. They would fit in really well here. So I stand by that completely. And I completely stand by immigration, where people come in to make a contribution, integrate, work hard. But of the Boris wave, whatever it is, 5 million or so, a third of those are now on benefits. And that wasn't the deal. The idea is that we want to help people, of course we do. We want to give people refuge if they need it. But you can't say the local people who are putting their money into their communities that they are then the people coming in who haven't paid the way in the same way, and they notice this. And to come to your second point about language and how I'm trying to talk about this just as honestly as I can, reflecting what local people say to me in their communities. And local people, especially working class communities, are very unhappy. They see unfairness. The Scots have got an incredible sense of fairness. And what they see is the fact that when the local connection rule was dropped, was broken by Nicola Sturgeon in 2022, when the asylum seekers were coming in, what happens in 2020? So the local authorities in Scotland always had a legal obligation to house homeless people, but there was a local connection rule where priority was given to local people first. When you take that local connection rule away, that changes the dynamic. And I went to Glasgow to find out what does that mean. So I'll just say, as I saw it, I went to a homeless shelter in Glasgow Street in Glasgow. I did the soup kitchen, and we served the food for 3 hours. And then went next door at 11 o'clock, and I did the registration for 30 people coming in overnight into that homeless shelter between 11 o'clock and 1 in the morning, when they came in one by one. There's 30 beds in that centre, and only 2 of the 30 beds that night were local people. So the other 28 people are asylum seekers. I spoke to about 10 of them, there were about 12, I did 2 locals and 10 others, and I asked them just where they came from. And, you know, we're not naming any names. I spoke to a chap who come from Kurdistan, and I said, and he admitted he'd been smuggled in. And I said, where have you been for the last year? He said, he'd been in Liverpool for the last year. And he then worked through the asylum process to get given the right to remain. And then in England, what would happen is that after a year, you'd be given leave to remain. The English council then says, you now need to leave this free accommodation. You now out into you go and get yourself a good job and get yourself some accommodation. And word gets around that the place that you get free accommodation is in Glasgow. So they've all come to Glasgow. That's what the guy said to me. I'm not, you know. And he had his national insurance number and his universal credit number. And then that moves into social housing. And so what I'm reflecting, what I've seen with my own eyes, is local people in their communities where there's housing shortages, where they feel there's stretched services, are seeing people. It's nothing to do with ethnicity or colour or the eyes. They're just seeing people come into their communities who seem to be getting given priority on services.
That language, which is ostensibly reasonable.
And if we ignore that, and they feel they're being ignored by mostly middle-class politicians, we don't want to talk about it, it's too uncomfortable, can't say that. And the result of that is that our local communities are feeling that they're not being properly represented. And they're feeling sore, and they're feeling angry, and they're feeling resentful. And we should not want that in our communities. And I'm being honest, standing up and saying what I saw, and I'm saying we need to fix that, and we need to make it fair.
Okay. Listen, I know we're running slightly over time, but I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Just drawing this stuff out. Welfare.
Yeah.
So we know that the number of people on welfare in Scotland is rising at a higher rate than it is elsewhere in the UK.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that? Because that's perfect territory for you, isn't it?
Well, the best welfare I can give anybody is a job. Okay, let's get people good jobs.
What would you do about the people that are going on to benefits and sickness benefits at the moment, where actually in Scotland it's slightly easier to
It is.
go into that? Would you make that tougher for them?
Look, we've got a million, back to the 3.6 million working age, a million people who are economically inactive of working age. Okay, now there's probably about 500,000 of those that are absolutely not going to work and absolutely will always be looked after in a compassionate society. So or not actually here to work. So you've got students, you've got adult carers, you've got early retirees, you've got seriously long-term disabled. We will always look after that community. That comes about 500,000. So another 500,000 people who are working age, who are not working, who have fallen out the pathway to work. They need help back into work. There's not any amount of adult retraining programs going on. There's not enough hand up given to those people. In my opinion, they've been parked on benefit, and it's not good for them. And I feel very strongly, almost I even say by way of moral duty, we have to get people back to work, to have a fulfilling life. The best way of fulfilling life is work. The best way of poverty is work. It's part of the Scottish DNA to work. It's how we're made, it's what we're all about. And we need to help those people back to work. Now, if you look at the choices made, the choices are made by the SNP government in the last 10 years. They, by their own admission, have created something which they call a welfare economy. I want to create a wealth economy. Now, a welfare economy is in a situation now where if you are able to self-certify on a number of bases, and you could just mathematically or alphabetically be in a situation where somebody goes to work on 35 hours of minimum wage is earning less than somebody who's not. To me, I think in my life, that's the first time that balance has gone the other way. For me, the principle should always be that if you choose to work should always pay more. And if you look at the last 10 years in the Hollywood budget, the single biggest spending department is welfare. It has gone up, get this number, over 10 years by 15% per annum. 15% per annum. The low spending departments are the police, local councils and education. They've gone up at 3% per annum. That's a political choice being made on a budget about where to spend your money.
But we don't like to get people back.
I want to put more money into education, training, skills, getting our economy growing.
Well, who doesn't?
But I know.
So what do you do in terms of welfare, in terms of qualification for some of these payments?
But people say these words, Chris, but don't know anything about it.
But do you tighten the criteria for qualification? Because at the moment it's easier to qualify for these things in Scotland than it is in England, and the numbers are soaring.
Yes.
In which case, and it's a huge part of the Scottish budget.
Yeah.
What do you? Because it's not enough to just train people and say we're going to.
No, absolutely. I would certainly tighten it up. I would certainly bring back face-to-face assessments, for sure. I mean, part of the issues in COVID obviously got in the way of this. We all started being done digital, etc. I'd certainly bring back face-to-face assessments. But it's not. But we have to back to the economy. We can grow the economy. If we can get the business owners back to feeling that they can invest in their businesses, if we can stop 50% of kids going to university to get degrees that don't take them anywhere, get 50% of our kids into colleges, if we can get them directed around the 10 centres of excellence, but 10 business sectors in Scotland that we're world class in, let's get ourselves organised around those 10 sectors. Let's get our kids, let's start talking about kids aged 13, 14 about what jobs they're going to do. Be a welder, right? Why not? Why not be a welder? Okay, so I went to Rosyth and to see Babcock. They've just had a massive big order come in from the Royal Danish Navy, and Scotson's had another one from the Norwegian Navy, and they are building the most technical military ships imaginable. And I went into this fabrication yard, and this massive big tubes. I was looking for the welder. I was looking for Billy Connolly. Where's the guy with the blowtorch? I said, "Where's the welder?" He said, "See that guy over there? There's a guy in the corner with a white coat in a booth with a laptop and a mouse, and he's welding at like 1 to 100,000 precision." Okay? I said, "What's he get paid?" 75 grand. Every barman in Edinburgh's got a degree, they're not earning 75 grand. Yeah? And then the weirdest thing is that the funding then got cut to the colleges. Fife College shut down their welding school. Okay? We've just brought in 300 welders from the Philippines. If I do a circle, or a 10-mile circle around Rosyth, how many people are working age, men and women, because women can weld on with that mouse. How many men and women are not working around a 10-mile radius? 3,000. We need 300 welders. We bring them to the Philippines. Come on, guys. I mean, come on. Who's in charge here?
Public sector pay. Another thing that is a huge burden on projections ahead.
Yeah.
Sort of 8-9% rising per year. We're not getting that in the private sector. What would you do? And then I think 2 years down the line, we're talking about 1% rise, which clearly isn't going to last. How would you deal with public sector pay and the burdens there?
Public sector have got their deal. Again, the welfare economy's been quite good for them because they've had 20 years of offered only wages, no redundancy, and a final salary pension scheme which went in the private sector long ago. Now here's the thing, what we got to do here, we're not trying to put anybody out of work, we're not trying to cut any frontline services. What we're trying to do is grow the economy and grow the 2 million people that work in the private sector. If we can grow the 2 million people that work in the private sector, let's say over 10 years we can get up to 2.5 million people working in the private sector. What about if you make the private sector pay more than the public sector? Without cutting the public sector, what if you make the private sector for £25 an hour versus £19 an hour, right? There will be natural gravitation at that point. People will go, they'll follow the money, they'll go where the money is. We might also be able to persuade 500,000 people who don't work at the moment to go back to work because work is cool. Work pays. Work is a good lifestyle, right? Let's do that. Let's aspire to that. Let's have a working economy. Let's have 2.5 million people working in the private sector. Let's create wealth. That will generate more tax revenues, which will create more money for public services.
So just a few quick fire questions, and then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. We're just going to push on, even though people are staring at me, saying there are things to be done. So that 2021 article, you got time? You said we should devolve corporation tax. Still agree with that?
No.
Why?
No, I just think we need to align more. 60% of all our exports go to England. We should just align. We're on one island. Can we just align with England? And to be better than them?
You said create a sovereign wealth fund, expand the Scottish National Investment Bank.
I definitely agree with create the sovereign wealth fund.
What would go into it?
Well, let's say, for example, we get our oil and gas industry going in, Chris. Well, that'd be a nice thing, wouldn't it? I mean, if we're in the oil industry right now, we'd actually be making a lot of money for the Treasury, wouldn't we? That could go a long way to alleviating fuel poverty, right? So let's learn from the lessons that we didn't learn in the last 50 years and put some money aside and create a sovereign wealth fund.
Okay. We should embrace the bespoke English academy model. Still agree with that?
I do. Well, look, I've got into trouble with a throwaway line on schools, so I'm not getting into that again. But at the end of the day, I think that I believe in parental choice, and I believe that schools that are run locally rather than by a central state are better schools. We've got a problem in our schools. We've got 700 registered school children in Scotland right now. Do you know how many of them are not regularly attending school? 230,000. I can't imagine. I learned that last week. I mean, check the number. Tell me if I'm wrong. That's a third of our pupil population not regularly attending school. So can we just agree our schools need to check? Because the schools are not working. Can we not make that ideological, please? Can we just say our schools are not working? The schools need to be fixed.
Okay. So probably 6 months ago, certainly a year ago, it was quite hard to find people who would be willing to treat with reform. You know, we were seen as toxic. Whatever. I'm interested in terms of, as the polls have shown that you are going to be a significant presence in the next Parliament, how that has changed in terms of civic and, I guess, civil service and some of the government agencies, whether you've suddenly found that they're reaching out to you to have conversations.
My diary is packed, which is why I keep on making mistakes. I've probably made one tonight. I'll probably all over the papers again for their own reasons. But my diary is packed with this, and we are doing, all the stakeholder groups want to talk to reform, no question about it, which is great.
What kind of organisation?
It's the CBI, we've done the Scottish Retail Consortium, Small Business Federation. I mean, the whole thing. ICAS. No, haven't heard from them yet. We did have I think my colleague Group Simpson had a meeting with a perfunctory meeting with a civil service type thing. I think the
What would the point of that meeting be?
I think it's on the basis that if you're going to have a significant role in the Parliament, you need to be brought up to speed on how the civil service works.
Right. Okay. Last question for me. So you're loaded, right? By any context. You're not J.K. Rowling, perhaps, or maybe you are. I don't know. But you will be the richest MSP Hollywood has had.
How do you know that?
Well, who else would it be?
Oh, I haven't seen our candidates yet.
I haven't seen your candidates yet. Well, that could be a moment. You've got a nice life. You find things, you know, you've got cars, you've got houses, you've famously got a boat, although Deacon Blue would rather you shut up about that. And you claim to represent ordinary folk. And I know you're a Malky for Greenock.
Yeah.
But you haven't lived that life for a long time. So how authentic, really, can you claim to understand working people when you go back to your very large house and your very cool sports car and have a lovely time with your very wealthy friends?
Well, going to talk to them and meet them and spend time with them and going on the streets with them and being out at 2 in the morning and pissing rain and something
Rishi
else.
Sunak did that and he never got the kind of credibility.
No. And frankly, I've never lost who I am, where I come from. Okay, my family still live in Greenock. I have many connections there. That's why I'm standing in Inverclyde, because it's my hometown. You know, I remember at Edinburgh University here putting my cash point in the car, the machine, nothing came out. I know what it's like to have no money. I know exactly what it's like to have no. Don't patronise me on that. I know what it's like to have no money, and I hated having no money. I want to help people with no money. I want to help people back on their feet. I want to help people get into work. I want to help people get good jobs. I want to help people improve their lives. What's wrong with that?
Right. Any questions? Yes.
Three-third question.
Outdoor voice, please, because we don't have a microphone.
Sorry?
If you can use your outdoor voice, because we don't have a microphone.
A three-part question. the Safari Gateway money has been revoked. The consultation from ENRA came out last week. At a time of geopolitics, when food security, food production and agriculture and the environment are important, what is your reaction to that consultation? What is your view, and how would you approach Treasury on the VAT inequity on repairs and renovations versus new build? And whilst you have explained that you have a plethora of candidates with obvious professional qualification, how are you going to deal with their cliff edge of ignorance which they may have across the whole spectrum of that with which they will have to deal?
You might not want to answer all of that because we don't have much time, Anne, but choose the question.
What was the first? It was Safari.
Safari Gateway.
What is that?
Sorry?
I don't know what that is.
In that case, I'll put the question to you in writing and you can Google it.
Thank you. That was what the minister always said. It's back to box. I'll write to you. I promise I will. I'll find out. In terms of the candidates, you know, you've got professional politicians in at the moment who can answer any question you like. But the question you have to ask yourself is the country run as well as it can do? And what we're saying is that we're going to bring some bright people who have not been in politics before, who are going to look at things differently with a fresh pair of eyes. There'll be some jeopardy in that, I'm sure. And I'll have to manage that as a leader. But at the end of the day, bright people who are motivated about the country to put themselves forward, I think is going to give us a good head start.
Okay, so they're a doctor and they know a lot about the NHS as a consumer, as a practitioner. But how are you going to explain to them what they need to get to grips with across education, environment, prisons, finance, taxation?
Well, why don't you ask the current ministers what they're doing with their great knowledge on these matters?
Sleep just now, Anne. Yes.
I hesitate to ask for a two-part question.
Oh,
But the first part is, because whether I've got a second question is dependent on the answer to the first. What is your view in terms of the opportunity for AI in, you know, you're previously in business and private finance. What is the opportunity of AI for the economy in Scotland and for jobs in the local economies?
Only as an enabler, but not as a silver bullet. And the reason why I want people to be welders is that it's not going to be taken over by AI, or chefs, or British gas engineers, or life science technologists are not going to be overtaken by AI. So I think we should get our economy a run around, as I say, our 10 centres of excellence, real technical jobs, and then in every single one of those, use AI to make things more efficient for real people doing real jobs.
Would it be a reform policy to be against AI in terms of a disruptive and destructive pattern in relation to jobs? So where AI can eradicate jobs in the way that you've been talking about the impact of renewables on the sort of communities and sort of the northeast, would you have a same approach, sort of visceral approach to a control of AI as you do with renewables? You've talked about.
No. AI is completely overblown as this thing's going to solve all the problems. AI is a tool that real people doing real jobs can use to make them more productive in their jobs. There will be certain jobs that will be removed by AI. I mean, you might think if you're a conveyancing lawyer, you might not have a future.
It'll just be my laptop talking to Malcolm.
But I think real jobs in the real economy will not disappear, but AI will be an enabler for that. And we've got to always continually make ourselves more productive, haven't we? We want higher wages, we want to create higher margins. We have to be more productive to do that, so we have to use the tools. The opposition will use that, the Chinese are using that, the Americans are using that. We need to compete in the global marketplace, but we're pretty good at that. I mean, the Scots, we bloody well invented it all.
Yes, Alistair Beach, yep.
Yeah, quick question. I like their comments on productivity. Yes.
A bit louder, Alistair.
Sorry, outside voice, okay. I like your comments on productivity. I think it is critical to our future and ability to afford our physical position. I guess I'm curious to understand that productivity are probably not just for Scotland, but the UK as a whole.
Yeah.
And how do you, I guess, position Scotland in a straight fiscal framework, which
mean, there's, we've not, Holloway obviously has got control over the devolved matters, not the reserve matters. There's some big levers in the reserve matters, obviously that are UK based, but Holloway's got control over 80% of what impacts on Scottish people's lives, around their schools, their jobs, their hospitals, their roads. For me, as a competitive person, I would want to measure productivity. I want to particularly measure GDP per capita. I want people to be wealthier per capita. And I would like to see us measure that, for example, against England, and see whether we can become more productive. Always make that a competition. I think we can do that. And I think if we got to make, particularly with the power of the universities we have here, and the research capability we have, we can, if we want to, I'm sure you can invent the Scottish measure of productivity, no question about it. And I'm sure we can apply that across our 10 centres of excellence, our 10 clusters. I'm sure we can do that, and I'm sure we can measure that, and that will result in higher wages to people and higher GDP per capita.
I guess it's sort of just a quick level. Measurement is fine. I guess it's what tools you actually can use in a default basis. Because it seems naively that even simple things like labour policy versus taxation policy are two separate parts of the framework.
Well, but that's why
two working together.
But that's why we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, and where we're going to start is by culling taxes. That'll be a big lever that we can pull.
Okay, last question from you, sir.
Yeah, do you think that the defections of Braverman, Zaghi and also Generic sit well with the reform base?
Look, I think that's certainly much more a sort of English question, and there have been there's some disquiet about that. But what's happening here is the Conservative Party is sort of going through its own gyrations of who are they. It's previously been a broad church. You mentioned One Nation. Maybe it's no longer a broad church. Maybe that party is actually having to work out who sits in where.
You're not quite impressed by Kenny Bedard, PMQs and...
Yeah.
It's pretty good, isn't she?
She was my boss for a year. I've got the highest regard for Kemi. Kemi's not Kemi is the best, I think probably the best leader we've had of the 6 that we've had in the last 15 years. But that's not the issue. The issue is she's got a legacy to deal with. The public don't trust the Conservative Party because it gave them the highest taxes since the war, the highest borrowing since the war, the highest energy prices since the war. Nothing works.
Well, listen, I think we're so far over time, but very grateful to you all for coming. Malcolm Robertson from Charlotte Street Partners is going to do a vote of thanks, and that'll end us up.
Yeah, given how much Chris has overrun, I'm going to try and keep this really short, because I know you've all got other places to be. It's been our great pleasure to work with Chris and his team from Enlighten on this series of events. The initiative came from Chris to get a few of the party leaders into a room and interrogate them as they gear up to ask for our votes in the May election. I hope you found these conversations as interesting and engaging as we have, and I want to thank teams both at Enlighten and my own team at Charlotte Street Partners for making them happen, because there's quite a lot of work that goes into this before we actually all turn up. A big thank you to Standard Life. They've changed their name from Phoenix during this series, and I'm sure you all agree that it's good to see that brand back at the heart of Scotland's business landscape. Thank you to Malcolm Offord for engaging with Chris and some of you this evening. When Chris and I first spoke about these events, it was our shared sense of curiosity that led us here. The important need to understand what those people who aspire to lead Scotland stand for and how they might change the country for the better. And that requires party leaders to turn up and to engage, and we're grateful that Malcolm has done so this evening. And finally, thank you to you all for turning up on what has been an inclement day. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.